Imagine the scene. It is a humid afternoon in 1986, in the deep, unpoliced woods of Maine, United States. A 20-year-old man named Christopher Knight is driving his new white Subaru Brat down a remote road. Imagine Christopher, a young man of high technical intelligence, a quiet electronics installer with no criminal record and no history of social conflict. Suddenly, he stops the car, leaves the keys in the ignition, and walks into the dense forest with nothing but a basic tent and a few supplies. This is the primary behavioral data point, a total and voluntary deletion of identity. He doesn't say goodbye to his family. He doesn't leave a note. He simply exits the human grid. The power dynamic of his life shifts from a functional member of society to a biological ghost. For the next 27 years, Christopher Knight would not speak a single word to another human being. He is not a hermit for religious or philosophical reasons. He is a master of isolation. The archive is open. The timeline of the longest social exclusion in modern history begins with the sound of a car door closing for the last time. Technical density. The forest of Maine covers over 17 million acres of dense canopy. The topography of North Pond consists of jagged glacial rocks and thick pine barrens, providing a natural camouflage for a man who decided to become invisible. Knight's car was eventually found and towed, but his biological rastro was lost in the vastness of the Atlantic forest. Knight moved with a calculated precision to establish his perimeter. He didn't build a cabin or a fire. Smoke would be a forensic marker that would lead to his detection. Instead, he created a camp between two large boulders, hidden under a canopy of green tarps. The clinical reconstruction of his living space shows a man obsessed with technical order. He used plastic bins to store stolen supplies, and created a floor of pine needles to muffle his movements. This is a severe behavioral adaptation to survive the Maine winters, where temperatures drop to 30 degrees below zero. He survived not by hunting, but by becoming a master of clean theft. He broke into summer cabins around North Pond with surgical discipline. He didn't take valuables. He took batteries, propane, food, and warm clothing. Every break-in was a technical audit of the resident supplies. He watched the families for weeks, learning their routines and the sounds of their locks. The power dynamic was absolute. He was the ghost who knew their lives, while they only knew him as a series of missing items. Technical density. Knight utilized lock manipulation techniques, often using a simple screwdriver to bypass standard deadbolts. He avoided leaving any biological traces like fingerprints or hair, moving only at night and using the shadows as a tactical advantage against the local homeowners who began to feel the psychological pressure of a silent, recurring intruder. The progression of time for Knight was measured not by clocks, but by the biology of the seasons. To survive the lethal winters, he developed a technical protocol of self-preservation. He would go to sleep at 7 p.m. and wake up at midnight, the coldest part of the night. He would then spend the hours until dawn walking in circles to keep his blood circulating. This is a masterpiece of biological discipline. He knew that if he slept through the deep freeze, he would be deleted by the cold. He never lit a fire, even in the most severe blizzards, to avoid the thermal signature that might alert the forest rangers. We analyze this as a state of hypervigilant autonomy. His mind was a locked circuit, focused entirely on mechanics of staying alive without human contact. The messy and unsolved problem of loneliness was deleted by his total absorption into the environment. He claimed that he lost the sense of where he ended and where the woods began. Every crime he committed, over 1,000 burglaries, was a calculated transaction for survival. He was a biological parasite on the community of North Pond, but one so efficient that he remained undetected for nearly 3 decades. Technical density. Knight's metabolic rate was likely adjusted through chronic exposure to cold, a phenomenon known as cold-induced thermogenesis. He maintained a low-calorie, high-fat diet stolen from pantry shelves to sustain his core temperature during the months of snow cover. In April 2013, the timeline of Knight's exclusion reached a technical breaking point. A local game warden named Sergeant Terry Hughes, who had been hunting the ghost of North Pond for years, installed a high-tech surveillance system at a nearby summer camp. The system included military-grade motion sensors and a silent alarm. At 1 a.m., Knight entered the Pine Tree Camp, a facility for people with disabilities. He was looking for food. He moved with his usual clinical silence, but he didn't know he had bypassed an invisible infrared beam. When Sergeant Hughes confronted him, the ghost was finally given a face. Christopher Knight, now 47 years old, surrendered without a word. He was wearing multiple layers of stolen clothing and carrying a bag of meat and candy. The intense expressions of the arresting officers reflect the shock of seeing a man who had vanished from the world in 1986. The forensic audit of his camp revealed a life frozen in time, a battery-operated radio, and books from 3 decades ago. The rastro of his existence was finally condensed into a single criminal file. Technical density: the alarm system was a high-frequency infrared tripwire linked to a remote notification unit. Knight's capture was the result of a coordinated tactical response that utilized the very technology, surveillance electronics, that he had once installed for a living before his disappearance. The interrogation of Christopher Knight was a clinical study in social exclusion. He struggled to find words, his vocal cords weakened by decades of silence. He told the investigators that he had no philosophy, no grand reason for his departure. He simply didn't fit into the human grid. We analyze this as a case of schizoid personality or extreme social withdrawal. During his 27 years, he claimed he never felt lonely. Instead, he described a state of total communion with the silence. This is a severe psychological adaptation. He had deleted the I to become part of the it of the forest. The power dynamic during the trial was bizarre. The community he had robbed for years was torn between anger and admiration for his survival skills. He was a technical marvel and a criminal nuisance. The forensic reconstruction of his 1,000 burglaries showed a man who was careful not to cause damage, often repairing locks after he had picked them. This polite intrusion is a unique behavioral marker. He wasn't a violent predator. He was a master of the invisible life. Technical density: Knight's cognitive state was evaluated for sensory processing sensitivity and autistic spectrum traits. His lack of a theory of mind regarding the fear he caused the homeowners suggests a profound psychological disconnection from human social constructs. When investigators reached Knight's camp, they found a masterpiece of environmental camouflage. The camp was invisible even from 5 feet away. He had used a complex system of ropes and tarps to divert rainwater away from his tent. He had a meticulous system for waste disposal to avoid the smell that might attract animals or humans. The technical audit of his supplies showed a man who lived like a soldier in a permanent state of war. He had hundreds of magazines and books, but he never wrote a single word himself. He had deleted his own voice from history. The forensic team spent days dismantling the camp, finding items stolen in the 80s that were still in perfect condition. This is a rastro of a man who treated his stolen goods with a severe, almost religious respect. The camp was a technical bubble, a time capsule of 1986 preserved in the Maine woods. Every item was a piece of a life he had stolen to sustain a life he had chosen to hide. Technical density: the stealth camping techniques Knight used are now studied by wilderness survival experts. His camp's low-impact signature was achieved through the strategic use of topography and the selective harvesting of deadwood to avoid fresh-cut markers that would be visible to aerial surveillance. Knight was sentenced to 7 months in jail and ordered to pay restitution. But for a man who had been free of human constraints for 3 decades, the jail cell was a different kind of void. The psychological pressure of being recalibrated to society was severe. He had to learn how to interact with people, how to use money, and how to deal with the noise of the modern world. Imagine the sensory sabotage of a man who had heard only the wind for 27 years suddenly being surrounded by the roar of the 21st century. He struggled with the deletion of his silence. The community of North Pond eventually forgave him, moved by the sheer technical impossibility of his survival. He returned to living with family, but the rastro of the forest never left him. He remains a man of few words, a biological artifact of a life lived outside the boundaries of civilization. The ghost of North Pond is no longer in the woods, but the forest is still in him. Technical density: Knight's transition back to society involved sensory integration therapy to manage the neurological shock of modern stimulation. The legal restitution of $1,500 was a symbolic closure to a case that involved thousands of dollars in stolen property across 3 decades. The final minute-by-minute forensic reconstruction of Dossier 20 ends here. Christopher Knight's life is a lesson in the severe power of the human will to choose isolation over community. The trace he left in the Maine woods is not one of violence, but of a total technical mastery of the art of being invisible. The biological facts are immutable. A man survived nearly 30 winters without a fire, without a home, and without a voice. The ghost of North Pond remains the definitive study in social exclusion and the mechanics of survival. Every piece of evidence, the tarps, the batteries, the pine needle floors, tell the story of a life that was deleted by choice and recovered by chance. Your mind is the final piece of this investigation. Join our community by clicking the subscribe button. Help us track the traces that the silence hides. I am your guide through the darkness, and I will return with a new dossier very soon. Keep your mind sharp. Focus on the facts with your eyes closed. And remember, the silence always has a story to tell, if you know how to listen. This is Mind 74, and we are the keepers of the cold files. The investigation is suspended, but the mystery of the silence remains. Until next time. Technical density, the Knight case has become a primary reference in environmental psychology and the study of voluntary social isolation. The total exclusion period of 27 years represents a physiological and psychological anomaly in human endurance records.